It started like any other day. The morning light streamed through the curtains, casting a golden hue across the room, but something felt off. I had that sinking feeling in my gut, the kind you get when you know something is wrong but can't quite put your finger on it. My wife, Ashley, was already out of bed, getting ready for her shift at McDonald's. A job she said she picked up for extra money, though, if I'm being honest, we didn't need it. I'm Mike, by the way. 34 years old, married to Ashley, who's a few years younger than me at 28. We've been together for 5 years now, married for 2. I thought we had it all. A modest home, plans to start a family, the whole American dream, you know? But lately, things had changed. Ashley had grown distant, always glued to her phone, texting someone who wasn't me. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, claiming it was just a friend from work. But her friend's name, Derek, had come up more than once in our conversations. I'll admit, I didn't think much of it at first. We all have friends at work, right? I tried to push down the nagging thoughts, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. After all, Ashley and I had always trusted each other. But then came the late nights. She started staying longer after her shifts, saying she was catching up with the team or helping out because someone had called in sick. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But doubts have a way of creeping in, slowly suffocating everything else. I remember the day things started to unravel. It was a Wednesday, middle of the week, nothing special. Ashley had gone to work that morning as usual, but she left her phone behind in her rush. A part of me thought about calling her to let her know, but something stopped me. Instead, I stared at the phone, lying there on the kitchen counter, as if it held all the answers I was too afraid to ask. I wish I could say I didn't touch it, but curiosity, or maybe desperation, got the best of me. Unlocking her phone felt like crossing a line I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. My heart was pounding in my chest as I swiped through her messages, scanning for anything that might explain the distance between us. And then there it was, a text from Derek. "Can't wait to see you again later, winky face." My blood ran cold. For a moment I just stood there, frozen, staring at the screen. I couldn't believe it. Ashley had always been so grounded. She wasn't the type to flirt with someone behind my back. Or at least, I didn't think she was. But here it was, undeniable proof, right in front of me. The conversation between them wasn't overly explicit, but it didn't need to be. It was clear. They had been seeing each other, and not just at work. I put the phone down, feeling my chest tighten with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. I should have confronted her right then and there, but I couldn't. I didn't know how. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, replaying the last few months in my head, wondering how I could have missed the signs. The late shifts, the excuses, the sudden need for extra income. It all made sense now, but in the worst way possible. Hours passed before Ashley came home. She walked in like nothing was wrong, her face glowing with the satisfaction of a good day's work. She smiled at me, the same smile that used to make my heart race, but now it just made me feel sick. "Hey babe," she said, kicking off her shoes by the door. "Work was crazy today. We had a huge rush, and Derek and I had to." I couldn't hear the rest of her sentence. Derek. That name, it echoed in my mind, taunting me. I must have stiffened, because she paused, looking at me with concern. "Mike? What's wrong?" I swallowed hard, forcing the words to form, even though my throat felt like it was closing up. "Who is Derek, really?" She blinked, her face going pale for a split second before she composed herself. "He's just a coworker." "Why? Just a coworker?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. I stood up, my legs feeling weak beneath me. "Then explain this." I tossed her phone on the table, Derek's text still open for her to see. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw something in her expression, guilt maybe? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Mike, it's not what you think." "Then tell me," I challenged, my voice rising despite the lump in my throat. "Tell me what it is, because it looks like you've been lying to me." Ashley hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her phone. I wasn't lying. It's just complicated. Complicated? My voice cracked. What the hell does that mean? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she looked down, avoiding my gaze. That silence. It was louder than any confession she could have made. I felt the room spinning around me, my world crashing down with every second that passed. My wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was standing there, unable to give me an answer. And in that moment, I realized something. The woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had married, was a stranger to me now. And that was just the beginning. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, laughing, touching, doing things that only I was supposed to share with her. The pain was unbearable, but I knew I needed to know the truth. All of it. What else had she been hiding? And was this just the beginning of something darker, something more painful than I could ever imagine? The next morning, the house felt like a tomb. Every corner seemed to echo with questions, but no answers. Ashley was quiet, unusually so, moving around like she was trying to keep her distance. She made coffee but didn't pour me a cup. Small, insignificant actions that spoke volumes. I didn't push her for details last night, couldn't really, but today? Today, I needed to know. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the silence almost unbearable. The coffee steamed between us, untouched. I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. Ashley, I started, my voice sounding more fragile than I wanted. I need you to be honest with me. She looked up, her eyes red like she hadn't slept either. I told you, Mike. It's not what you think. I almost laughed. Not what I think. I saw the texts, Ashley. I saw enough to know something is going on. Don't insult me by pretending this is nothing. Her hands shook as she held her mug, and for a moment, I thought she might tell me everything. But she just stared down at the table, avoiding my gaze. We've just been talking. It's not serious. He's going through a rough time, and I've been there for him. That's all. I clenched my jaw, the words bitter on my tongue. Talking? I stood up, knocking my chair back in the process. What kind of talking makes you leave your husband at home while you run off to be with another man? Do you think I'm stupid? I'm not having an affair. She snapped back, finally meeting my eyes. There was fire in her voice now, defensive, almost desperate. I haven't slept with him. But you've thought about it, haven't you? The question hung in the air between us, and her silence answered for her. I could see the guilt pooling in her eyes, that tiny flicker of truth she didn't want to admit to herself, let alone me. She opened her mouth to speak, but I was already done listening. I need to clear my head, I muttered, grabbing my keys off the counter. We'll talk when I get back. I didn't give her a chance to respond before I walked out the door. My mind was spinning, my emotions a tangled mess. I drove aimlessly for a while, not even sure where I was going. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house, with her, pretending everything was fine when it was all falling apart. After what felt like hours, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the McDonald's where she worked. The place looked so ordinary, like it hadn't played a part in destroying my life. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find here, maybe some sort of closure. Answers? But as I sat in my car, watching the customers come and go, I saw him. Derek. He was coming out of the back entrance, laughing with a couple of other employees, looking carefree. For a moment, I felt like an idiot. This guy was younger, maybe mid-20s, with a cocky smile that seemed too easy for someone who had been messing with my wife. I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I stayed in my car, watching as he walked toward his truck. Before I could even think it through, I found myself stepping out of the car and crossing the parking lot, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't let this go on any longer. He was the key to all of this. Derek! I called out, my voice sharp and strained. He turned around, surprised to see me, his carefree expression faltering for a split second. Hey! He hesitated, clearly unsure of who I was. Do I know you? You know my wife. I shot back, my voice shaking with a mix of fury and pain. Ashley. His face paled, and he took a step back. Look, man, I didn't. You didn't what? Think I'd find out? I spat, cutting him off. I know something's been going on between you two. So don't stand there and act like this is nothing. He glanced around, as if searching for an escape, but there was none. It's not. I mean, we haven't. It's complicated. Complicated? I was so sick of that word. It was the same thing Ashley had said, and I wasn't about to hear it from him, too. Cut the crap. I deserve to know what's really going on. Derek ran a hand through his hair, clearly flustered. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. Ashley, she's been going through some stuff, all right? She confides in me, that's all. We haven't slept together. I stared at him, my fists clenching at my sides. It was almost worse that they hadn't crossed that line, like their emotional connection was somehow deeper, more intimate. I felt sick. You need to stay away from her, I said, my voice low and cold. Whatever's been going on, it ends now. I don't care if you're just talking. I don't care if you think you're her friend. She's my wife. Derek didn't say anything, just nodded, looking more uncomfortable by the second. I turned on my heel and walked back to my car, my heart racing. As I drove away, I wasn't sure if I felt any better. All I knew was that the cracks in my marriage were starting to show, and no amount of denial or excuses could patch them up. I had confronted Derek, but the real battle was waiting for me at home, with Ashley. And part of me wasn't sure if I was ready for that fight. When I got back to the house, Ashley was sitting on the couch, staring at the TV but clearly not watching it. The tension in the room was thick, almost suffocating. I stood in the doorway, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know where to begin. Mike, I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never wanted this to happen. I walked over to her, sitting down on the edge of the coffee table, facing her. Then why did it? She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. I don't know. I needed something. I didn't even realize it was missing until you found it with him? I finished for her, my voice harsh. She shook her head. No. I swear, Mike, it wasn't about him. It was about me. I felt lost. Like I wasn't enough for you. Like I was disappearing. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been so wrapped up in my own feelings, my own suspicions, that I hadn't even considered hers. But that didn't make it right. None of this was right. I don't know how to fix this, I admitted, my voice cracking. I don't know if it can be fixed. For the first time, Ashley didn't have an answer. And that scared me more than anything. The days that followed were a blur. Ashley and I moved through the motions of our life, but it was like we were living in two separate worlds. She tried to make small talk, acting as if we could just push this under the rug, but every conversation felt forced. I couldn't shake the image of her and Derek. Whether they'd physically crossed the line or not didn't matter anymore. It was the betrayal of trust, the emotional connection she shared with him, that stung the most. I didn't know what to do, where to turn. It felt like I was drowning in a sea of confusion and anger, and every time I thought I was ready to confront her again, I'd lose the words. What could I say that I hadn't already? What could she say that would make this better? But then, everything changed. It was a Saturday morning. I woke up early, something tugging at my gut. Ashley was still asleep, her back to me. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, wondering if this was how our life would be from now on. Quiet resentment, unspoken apologies, and the unrelenting ache of a marriage hanging by a thread. I had planned on going for a run to clear my head, but I made a snap decision instead. I needed to know if this thing with Derek was really over. I threw on some clothes, grabbed my keys, and decided to drive to McDonald's, hoping Derek was working. If he wasn't, I didn't know what I'd do, but my mind was set. I had to get to the bottom of this. No more waiting. No more hoping things would fix themselves. The drive felt like an eternity, but when I finally pulled into the parking lot, my heart sank. There it was, Derek's truck, parked in the employee lot. I sat in my car for a minute, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I knew I had to confront him again. I needed more than vague reassurances. I needed him to stay out of our lives for good. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance, rehearsing what I might say in my head, when suddenly I saw her. Ashley. She wasn't supposed to be here. Her shift wasn't until later in the afternoon, but there she was, walking out of the restaurant with Derek. They were laughing. My stomach dropped, and I felt the world tilt. I ducked behind a parked car, watching them from a distance, my heart pounding in my ears. I knew it. I knew something was still going on. I watched as Derek opened the passenger door to his truck, and Ashley climbed in, like it was the most normal thing in the world. They were leaving together. Without a second thought, I jumped back in my car, keeping my distance as I followed them down the road. I couldn't believe this was happening. After all the promises, the tears, "It's not what you think." Here they were, driving off like they had nothing to hide. They didn't go far. Just a few miles down the road, Derek pulled into a cheap-looking motel. My heart slammed in my chest as I watched them park, get out of the truck, and walk into one of the rooms. No hesitation. No second thoughts. This wasn't just a friendship. I sat there in disbelief, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The world outside felt distant, surreal. People walked by, cars passed, life went on as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. The reality of what was happening hit me like a freight train. Ashley wasn't just lost or confused, she was choosing this. She was choosing him. My first instinct was to burst into that room, to catch them in the act and finally get the truth shoved in my face. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was the overwhelming numbness that had settled into my bones, but I couldn't move. All I could do was sit there and let the truth sink in. After what felt like an eternity, I drove back home. I didn't even wait for them to come out. There was no point. I had seen enough. The ride back was a blur of rage, heartbreak, and disbelief. My thoughts raced, my emotions spiraling out of control, but at the center of it all was one simple fact: I couldn't stay in this marriage. Not after this. When I got home, I paced around the living room, trying to decide what to do next. I didn't want to face her when she came back. I didn't trust myself to stay calm, to hold back the tidal wave of emotions that had been building up for so long. I needed a plan, something to focus on. Divorce. The word kept bouncing around in my head, and even though it felt like a knife twisting in my gut, I knew it was the only way forward. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out my laptop. My hands were shaking as I Googled divorce lawyers in the area, scrolling through names and numbers, my mind spinning. I found a few that seemed promising, but I couldn't bring myself to make the call. Not yet. I was still too raw, too consumed by everything that had happened. I needed time to process. That's when the front door opened. Ashley walked in, her face flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. She froze when she saw me sitting there, my laptop open, staring at her like she was a stranger. For a few moments, neither of us said anything. The silence was unbearable. "Mike," she began, her voice shaky, like she knew the hammer was about to drop. "Don't," I said, my voice cold and detached. "Don't even try to explain." She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "I followed you, Ashley. I saw everything." Her face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. She didn't deny it this time. There was no point. "Mike, Stop." My voice was louder now, the anger bubbling to the surface. "You lied to me. You looked me in the eye and lied. And for what? For him?" Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. I had given her every chance to come clean, to make things right, but she had chosen this path. She had chosen to betray me. "I made a mistake," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I never meant to hurt you." "Well, you did." I shot back, my hands shaking. You hurt me in ways I can't even begin to explain. And now? Now there's nothing left. She broke down then, tears streaming down her face as she tried to reach out to me. Mike, please. I love you. I don't want to lose you. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. You already lost me. The weight of those words hit us both. There was no going back from this. Not now. I'll be filing for divorce, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. You can keep the house. I don't care anymore. But I'm done. Ashley sobbed, her hands covering her face as she sank to the floor. But I felt nothing. The man who had loved her, who had trusted her, was gone. All that was left was the shell of someone who had been betrayed in the worst possible way. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her behind. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't look back. I walked out of the house that day feeling more hollow than I ever thought possible. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the complete unraveling of everything I thought my life was. The weight of it all felt crushing, but for some reason, the tears didn't come. Instead, there was a numbness, a detachment that protected me from falling apart. I drove aimlessly, not really caring where I was going, just needing to be anywhere but there. The streets blurred past me, the afternoon sun beating down like it didn't care about the storm raging inside of me. I ended up in the parking lot of a strip mall, my car idling as I stared blankly at the world outside. Couples walked hand in hand, kids tugged at their parents' sleeves, laughing as they passed by. And all I could think was, how did my life turn into this? Eventually, I found myself pulling out my phone, scrolling through the list of lawyers I had saved earlier. My finger hovered over one name in particular, a divorce lawyer with decent reviews and a promise of handling sensitive cases with care. I dialed the number before I could second-guess myself. The receptionist was polite, professional. I told her what I needed, my voice steadier than I expected, and within minutes, I had an appointment scheduled for the following week. It was that easy. The first step toward ending my marriage, just a phone call away. And yet, when I hung up, I didn't feel any better. If anything, the reality of what I was doing started to sink in. This was it. The end of everything I built with Ashley. For the next few days, I threw myself into work. I needed the distraction, something to keep my mind off the wreckage of my personal life. I stayed late at the office, came home after dark, and barely exchanged more than a few words with Ashley. We were like ghosts living in the same house, silent, avoiding each other, pretending the other didn't exist. The few times we did cross paths, it was like walking on eggshells. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the sadness, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Not anymore. I spent most nights in the spare bedroom, the one that used to be our guest room but had now become my refuge. It was strange, lying there in the dark, knowing she was just a few feet away, sleeping in the bed we once shared. The silence between us felt like a living thing, growing heavier with each passing day. It was a week later, just before my appointment with the lawyer, when something happened that I didn't expect. I came home late, as usual, hoping to avoid any interaction with Ashley. But as I walked through the door, I noticed the house was unusually quiet. No lights on, no sound of the TV in the background like she normally had going. For a second, I wondered if she wasn't home, but then I heard a sound coming from the kitchen, a soft, muffled noise that made my stomach turn. I walked in to find Ashley sitting at the kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of wine in front of her, her face streaked with tears. She looked up when she saw me, her eyes red and swollen, like she'd been crying for hours. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We just stared at each other, the weight of everything we hadn't said hanging between us. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry, Mike." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream, to yell at her for destroying everything, but another part of me was just tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being angry, tired of feeling like my life was falling apart. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she continued, her voice cracking. "I don't know why I did it. I don't know what I was thinking. But I never stopped loving you. I still love you. Those words hung in the air, suffocating me. Love? How could she say that after everything she'd done? How could she possibly think that love would make any of this okay? I don't care anymore, I said, my voice flat, emotionless. You made your choice, Ashley. You chose him. And now it's over. She broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably, her head in her hands. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve you, but please, don't leave me. I'll do anything. I'll fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job. I'll never see Derek again. Just please don't give up on us. I stared at her, watching as she fell apart in front of me, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No sympathy, no anger, just a deep, hollow emptiness. Maybe there was a part of me that had once wanted to hear her say all of that. Maybe a week ago, those words would have meant something. But now they were just too late. I've already made up my mind, I said, my voice steady. I'm filing for divorce. The look on her face was one I'll never forget. Pure devastation. It was like the ground had been ripped out from under her, like she couldn't believe this was really happening. But it was. And there was no going back. I'm sorry, I said, standing up from the table. But this is over. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her there with her tears and her apologies. I didn't go to the spare bedroom that night. Instead, I grabbed my keys and drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Not with her. Not with the memories of everything we used to be. The next morning, I found myself sitting in front of the lawyer's office, my heart heavy as I watched the world go by outside the car window. People bustled around, oblivious to the fact that my entire world was crumbling. It was strange, how life went on even when yours was falling apart. I took a deep breath and walked inside, feeling like I was on autopilot. The lawyer, Karen Donovan, was kind but direct. She didn't sugarcoat anything, but she didn't make me feel like a fool either. She explained the process, the paperwork, the division of assets. It all felt cold, mechanical, like we were talking about some distant, impersonal transaction instead of the end of my marriage. I know this is difficult, Karen said, her voice softening a bit as she glanced at me over the top of her glasses. But you're doing the right thing. If you're ready to move forward, we can have the papers filed within a week. I nodded, barely hearing her. My mind was elsewhere, drifting back to all the moments Ashley and I had shared. Our first date, our wedding day, the time we spent dreaming about our future. It all seemed so distant now, like it had happened to someone else. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching my own life from the outside. Karen handed me a stack of papers to sign, and as I put pen to paper, something inside me shifted. It was final. This was really happening. And yet I didn't feel the relief I thought I would. Instead, I felt empty. When I left the office, the sun was shining brightly, mocking the storm that raged inside me. I got into my car and sat there for a long time, staring at the divorce papers on the seat next to me. The end of my marriage was official now. There was no going back. When I got home later that evening, the house was dark and quiet. Ashley wasn't there. For a moment, I wondered if she had left, packed her things and gone somewhere. But then I saw a note on the kitchen counter, written in her handwriting. I'm staying at a friend's house for a few days. I need time to think. I'm sorry for everything. I love you, Ashley. I crumpled the note in my hand, staring at the empty space where she used to stand, where we used to argue, laugh, and live. It was over now. I had made my decision, and there was no turning back. But as I stood there, alone in the quiet of our empty house, I couldn't help but wonder. Was this really what I wanted? Or had I just lost everything that mattered? The silence in the house after Ashley left was deafening. Each corner of every room felt colder, emptier than it had before. I sat down on the couch, staring at the walls, feeling the weight of everything that had happened crash down on me all at once. The truth was, despite making the decision to file for divorce, there was no sense of victory, no relief. Just a dull, aching emptiness that gnawed at me every second. Ashley was gone, staying with a friend, and the note she left behind sat crumpled in my pocket. I didn't know what I expected her to say, but seeing her handwriting, reading the words, "I love you," felt like a cruel twist of fate. How could she still say that after everything? How could those words carry any meaning after what she'd done? I tried to shake the thought from my mind, but it lingered, festering in the silence. I had been so sure, so certain that divorce was the only way forward. But now, sitting there in the stillness of an empty home, I couldn't help but feel a pull in the opposite direction. Had I made the right choice? Or was I walking away from something that, despite the betrayal, could still be saved? I picked up my phone, staring at the screen, my finger hovering over Ashley's number. I knew I should leave it alone. She was the one who betrayed me, after all. She made her choices, and now I was making mine. But that gnawing feeling wouldn't go away. There was something about the way she looked at me when I told her it was over, something in her eyes that felt real, that felt broken in a way I hadn't seen before. Before I could overthink it, I pressed the call button. The phone rang once. Twice. Then, on the third ring, she answered. "Mike?" Her voice was soft, hesitant, like she didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to say. I sat there for a moment, gripping the phone, my throat tight. "Yeah. It's me." There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment, I wondered if she was about to hang up. But then, she spoke again, her voice shaky, like she was on the verge of tears. "I wasn't sure if you would call," she admitted, and I could hear the vulnerability in her words. I thought you'd be done with me." I should have been. Every logical part of me screamed that I should have been done with her the moment I saw her walk into that motel with Derek. But my heart wasn't listening to logic. It never had. "I don't know what I'm doing," I said honestly, my voice cracking. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Ashley. But I can't stop thinking about everything we've been through. I can't just forget it all." There was a muffled sound on the other end, like she was wiping her tears or trying to compose herself. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to take me back. I don't know how it all got so messed up, Mike. I didn't plan for any of this." I closed my eyes, leaning back against the couch, trying to make sense of the swirl of emotions inside me. "Then why? Why did you do it? What was missing that you couldn't find here with me?" Her answer came quietly, barely above a whisper. "I don't know. I really don't. I felt lost, like I wasn't enough for you, like I wasn't enough for myself. And Derek, he filled some kind of void I didn't even realize was there. It wasn't about you, Mike. It was never about you not being enough." I clenched my jaw, the familiar sting of betrayal resurfacing. "But it was still your choice. You chose to go to him." "I know," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But Mike, please. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose what we had. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back, but if there's any part of you that still loves me, please don't end it like this." Her words hung in the air, thick with desperation and guilt, but also with something else. Hope. I could hear it in her voice, the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way through this. But was that even possible? "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," I admitted, the weight of the truth settling between us. "I know," she said softly. "And I'll do whatever it takes to rebuild that trust. If you want me to quit my job, I'll do it. If you want me to cut off all contact with Derek, I already have. I'll go to therapy, I'll do anything, but I need to know if you're willing to give me another chance. Even if it's just the smallest chance." I sat there in silence, her words echoing in my head. I didn't want to make decisions based on a moment of weakness. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't weakness I was feeling. Maybe it was the memory of the love we once shared, the hope that it could still be there beneath all the hurt and betrayal. "I can't make any promises," I said finally, my voice low and uncertain. "I don't know what the future holds for us. But I'm willing to talk. That's all I can give you right now." There was a soft sigh of relief on the other end of the line, and I could almost picture her sitting there, wiping away her tears. That's all I'm asking for. We talked for a little while longer, about nothing in particular. It was awkward, strained, but there was a glimmer of something between us, a fragile thread of hope that maybe, despite everything, we weren't completely broken. When we hung up, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was still angry, still hurt, but for the first time since this whole mess began, I didn't feel entirely hopeless. Maybe we had a chance. Maybe. A few days passed, and Ashley came back home. We didn't dive into deep conversations right away. Instead, we started slow. She kept her distance, respectful of the walls I'd built around myself. I couldn't let her back in completely, not yet. But there was something different in the air, a cautious truce, perhaps. We started sleeping in the same bed again, though we never touched. It was more about proximity, like we were relearning how to exist around each other. The house didn't feel so cold anymore, but the hurt was still there, lingering in the background, waiting for the right moment to flare up. Then came the unexpected. One evening, I was sorting through the mail when I came across a letter, addressed to Ashley. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but something about it made me uneasy. I hesitated for a moment, the envelope in my hand, before deciding to hand it to her. She opened it in front of me, her eyes widening as she read the contents. I watched as her expression shifted from surprise to shock, then to something else, something darker. "What is it?" I asked, my heart racing. I could see the color draining from her face as she silently handed me the letter. It was from Derek. A handwritten letter, filled with apologies and regrets, begging for her to reconsider. He talked about their time together, how he never meant to fall in love with her but couldn't help it. And then, at the bottom of the page, something that sent a cold shiver down my spine. "I'll be waiting for you. If you change your mind, you know where to find me." I stared at the letter in disbelief. After everything, after I had confronted him, after she had sworn it was over, Derek was still in the picture, lurking, waiting. Ashley's voice was shaky, tears filling her eyes as she reached for my hand. "Mike, I didn't know about this. I haven't spoken to him. I swear." But the damage was done. The hope I'd begun to rebuild, the tiny sliver of trust that had started to form, shattered in an instant. I crumpled the letter in my hand, feeling the familiar sting of betrayal surge through me once again. "I can't do this," I said, my voice barely holding back the anger. "I thought maybe we had a chance. But now I don't know if I can ever believe you. Please, Mike," she begged, her voice cracking. "I didn't know. I'll do anything. Just don't give up on us." I turned away from her, the letter still clenched in my fist. I wanted to believe her, but how many times had I been down this road? How many more chances was I supposed to give her? And just like that, I realized something. No matter how hard we tried, no matter how many promises were made, the cracks in our marriage were too deep, too broken to be fixed. Without another word, I walked out the door. And this time, I wasn't sure if I'd ever come back. The sun was setting as I walked out of the house, the sky streaked with orange and red. The air felt heavy, like even nature knew that something was ending. I didn't have a destination in mind, didn't even grab my car keys. I just needed to get away from the lies, the broken promises, and the constant tug of hope that things might still somehow work out. As I walked down the street, the weight of everything finally hit me. I had spent so much time holding on, trying to fix something that had been shattered beyond repair. I had tried to convince myself that there was still something worth saving, that the love we once had could somehow rise from the ashes of betrayal. But deep down, I knew the truth. We were beyond saving. I found myself at the park, the one we used to go to when we first started dating. Back then, life was simpler. We'd sit on the bench by the lake, talking for hours about our future, dreaming about the life we'd build together. I hadn't been back here in years, but somehow, my feet had carried me here, like I needed one last reminder of what we used to be. I sat down on the bench, staring out at the water. The memories flooded back, our first kiss, the way she used to laugh, the way I used to feel like I was the luckiest man in the world. But those memories felt distant now, like they belonged to someone else. The man who had loved her with his whole heart was gone, replaced by someone who had been hurt too many times to ever fully heal. I don't know how long I sat there, watching the ripples on the lake, letting the cold air wrap around me like a blanket. At some point, I realized that it didn't matter how long I stayed. Going back to the house wasn't going to change anything. I wasn't sure what to do, but I knew that whatever was coming next, it didn't involve Ashley. When I got home, the house was dark. There was no sign of Ashley, and part of me wondered if she had finally left for good. A wave of relief washed over me at the thought, but there was also a sting, an acknowledgement that this was really the end. The final chapter of our story. I walked into the living room, and there, sitting on the coffee table, was her wedding ring. Next to it, a piece of paper, folded neatly. My heart sank as I picked it up, knowing this was the last thing she'd ever say to me. The note was short, but it said everything it needed to. Mike, I'm leaving. For good this time. I know you won't believe me, but I never wanted it to end like this. I loved you. I still love you. But I know that love alone isn't enough to fix what I've broken. I thought about fighting for us, about staying and trying to prove to you that I could change, that I could be the woman you deserve. But the truth is, I don't think I'll ever be that person again. I'm not who I was when we first met, and maybe that's my fault. Maybe I let myself get lost in all the wrong places. I wish I could take it all back, the lies, the betrayal, everything that hurt you. But I can't. All I can do is walk away, give you the space to heal, and hope that someday you'll find peace. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what comes next. But I do know that staying here will only make things worse. For both of us. I'm sorry, Mike. I'm sorry for everything. Goodbye. Ashley. The note slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the floor. I stood there for a long time, staring at the ring on the table, the silence of the house pressing in on me. This was it. The end. No more conversations, no more tears, no more trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through my fingers. I sat down, the reality of it all washing over me. I thought I'd feel more, anger, sadness, maybe even regret, but all I felt was emptiness. Like I had already mourned this marriage long before Ashley had decided to leave. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, letting the finality of it sink in. I was free, but it didn't feel like the victory I had hoped it would be. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of numbness and slow healing. I moved through the motions of life, going to work, coming home to an empty house, learning how to live on my own again. Ashley didn't come back. I hadn't expected her to. I didn't know where she went, and honestly, I didn't care. She was gone from my life, and that was how it had to be. I filed the divorce papers, not because I wanted to, but because it was the only logical next step. There was no dramatic confrontation, no messy court battle. We both knew it was over. I signed the papers, and within a few months, it was official. I was no longer her husband. People say divorce feels like a death, and I guess they're right. It's the death of a future you once believed in, the death of a love that you thought would last forever. But in that death, there's also a chance for rebirth. A chance to start over. I didn't know what starting over looked like for me yet, but I knew that I couldn't stay stuck in the past. I threw myself into work, into the gym, into anything that would take my mind off the emptiness. Slowly, life started to feel normal again. I even went out with friends, something I hadn't done in a long time. They had been there for me in the aftermath, supporting me in ways I hadn't expected, and it was nice to feel like I was reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost. But there were still moments, quiet, lonely moments, where I'd think about her. Not with anger anymore, but with a kind of sad acceptance. We had loved each other once, deeply, but love isn't always enough. Sometimes people drift apart, sometimes they make mistakes that can't be undone, and sometimes, even when you fight to hold on, you have to let go. One evening, months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself back at the park. The same bench by the lake where Ashley and I had once dreamed of the future. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I had survived the worst of it, and though the scars were still there, they didn't hurt as much as they used to. I sat there for a while, watching the ripples on the lake, thinking about everything that had led me to this moment. The pain, the betrayal, the loss, it was all part of my story now. But it wasn't the end. It was just one chapter, and now, a new one was beginning. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I was stronger than I ever thought I could be. And that was enough. As I stood up to leave, I took one last look at the lake, the memories of Ashley drifting away like the setting sun. It was time to move on. And this time, I was ready. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, hit like and leave a comment with your favorite part. We'd love to hear your perspective.